My name is Ed Martin, and I'm an engineer with the University of Arizona. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about irrigation engineering, and in particular, engineering in ancient Egypt. An engineer is a person who uses science and mathematics and applies it to real-world problems. And we come up with solutions to problems like building a car or running a locomotive. There's all kinds of applications for engineering. In particular today, though, I want to talk to you about irrigation engineering. Today, irrigation engineers are the ones who help design the pumps that pump the water and the sprinklers that spray the water. But we're going to talk a little bit first about how this all began. And it really began way long ago in ancient Egypt. And back then, they didn't have pumps like we had today. They had something called a shadoof. Now, a shadoof was a way to get the water from the wells, from the water that was under the ground, into the fields. It was a way for them to be able to bring water into a desert area where there was very, very little rain in order for them to grow plants for them to eat. Now, they had a lot of challenges back then, folks. Our basin irrigation is where you have a basin, you have a field that's fairly level, below grade, below ground, so to speak, and you fill that basin up with water. And so once the flood waters receded, the basin still had water in it, these shallow wells had water. Once the basins finally dried up, the wells still had water in it, and they would use the shadoofs to move the water from those wells into their fields. They didn't have electricity, and they couldn't just turn on a pump. They didn't have any shovels, and they didn't have any backhoes or things like that. All they had was some wooden tools, some stone tools, and the muscles in their body. You got to remember that every time they put the water into a ditch, like we do today, they had to dig that ditch by hand. And they had to make sure that that ditch went downhill, because we all know water doesn't run uphill. And even when it went into the field, the water still had to go downhill. And so they had to just kind of use their line of sight to make sure it was all running downhill. Today we have machines that use lasers and make sure that the ground's very level. So we siphon the water from the big canal into the field. And then the water is distributed throughout the field. These fields are laser leveled, so we know the elevation very well on these fields, and we maintain a nice level field so that the distribution of the water is highly efficient. But back then they didn't have that. And that was a real challenge for many of them. And you have to imagine, too, that back then, once they figured this out, they were able to perfect the art of using the shadoof to get the water into the field. They probably shared it with other folks. The shadoof started in ancient Egypt, but it's used across the world. So you know that as traders came by and traded for food and goods, they saw that what they were doing in Egypt, and they shared the idea, and the idea kind of spread around. Now today, we do irrigation differently, but not all that differently. We still have surface irrigation like they did back then, but now we have concrete ditches instead of having dirt ditches. So it's a little bit different. They obviously didn't have those types of things way back when. So our efficiencies are much higher. But the concept is basically the same. So instead of using the shadoof to pick the water up and pour it into the field, we use siphon tubes now to siphon the water out of the ditch. And as I said, we have machines that dig those ditches for us. The desert here in Arizona is one of the most productive areas in the world. Last year we had one of the highest cotton yields in history, the highest one in the entire United States right here in Arizona. We produce 90% of the winter lettuce crop down in the Yuma area. So it's very productive soil, but the one thing you have to have is water. Now in engineering, when we're trying to solve problems, one of the things that you have to realize is you don't get it right always the first time. A couple times where you give something a try and it doesn't work out. And so it's a little what we call trial and error. We like the trial part because that's fun, because you get to do some work and try to solve some problems. The error part we don't like so much, but it happens. You try something and it doesn't work out, and then you go back and you try it again and you keep trying it until you finally get it right. Now as engineers, we know that this is going to happen, so we're kind of prepared for that. But as you go out in the world and you start exploring and you start doing your own little trial and error, you got to be prepared that there's going to be a couple times when it just won't work out. You look at the problems, you look at what happened, and you try and work out, and you try to figure out, I should say, what went wrong. And once you find out what went wrong, you fix that and you go back and you try it again. It seems to be a lot of buzz, a lot of talk about technology. Technology is, well, it's what you're looking at right now. This is technology, the technology of being able to see my image and listen to my voice over long distances. And that really does help solve a lot of problems, because I can actually talk to people in faraway lands, look at designs through the computer, and maybe help them figure out what the problem is. So in that case, technology works out very well. But you know, technology doesn't always solve the problem. Sometimes it makes the problem easier to solve. But in all honesty, when it comes down to it, actually the person is the one who solves the problem. So you, as budding engineers out there, you are the ones who are really solving the problems. You might use technology to help you solve the problems. What is technology made of? Well, technology is made of electricity and buzzers and buttons and lights. There's all kinds of stuff. We all know about the different types of technologies that are out there. Some of them are fairly simple. You have to remember there's still certain laws that govern how things move, such as gravity, that water runs downhill. So even though that's not really technology, it is something that we have to deal with when we're talking about solving problems. Being an engineer at home, you know, I think you can do it, and I think you should try. Make sure you get your parents' permission before you do, but you'll see problems at home. Problems of a leaky pipe, perhaps, something dripping. And you might want to try to figure out how you can solve that problem. And you go in and you talk with your parents and you work out a scheme. And as engineers, we always have a plan. So we lay out a plan, talk about how we think we're going to solve that problem, and draw up some drawings, try to solve that problem. And if you don't, try a different approach. But I really think that any one of you can grow up to be a great engineer. And you don't have to be great in science, and you don't have to be great in mathematics. You just have to be good, and you have to know how to mix the two together and get the right mix of science and math. And with that and experience, anyone can be a good engineer.